Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk, now in its 17th year, one of the city's longest running TV talk shows. Phones are open tonight, so please join the conversation by calling 718-960-7241. You can also email questions or comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Well, a couple of weeks ago, we featured an exclusive look at Mill Pond Park and the areas around Yankee Stadium. The park's advocates who joined us that night had a lot more to say, and because of the photo show that we had, there wasn't really enough time to get into some of the important related issues, such as the focus of the Bronx Park's Speak Up, the Bronx waterfronts, and more. And so to be fair, we've re-invited those guests from 2 weeks ago to simply continue the dialogue. So it's the Chauncey and Courtney show back here on Bronx Talk. From the Harlem River Working Group, it is Chauncey Young. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And the Chief Operating Officer from the Metropolitan Waterfront Alliance, Courtney Guarel. Sorry, I told you I was going to mispronounce it, but eventually I got it. Courtney, good evening, and thank you for joining us, and thank you for coming back on the show. Chauncey, let's start with you. The Bronx Speak Up was this past Saturday when we had done the show. We were previewing it as coming up. What I've heard from people who were there, I was not there, but there was real good energy. There seemed to be a real good feeling of Bronx people that these are our parks and we have something to say. Give me like a review of what happened on Saturday.
Sure. So we had over 250 people at the event, which is a very good turnout for a Saturday. We had, representatives of the Parks Department, representatives of elected officials there. We had, parks advocates from many different groups across the Bronx. And we really had a great discussion about waterfront access, about different groups, and what they'd accomplished, whether it was developing parks, developing park programs and activities for youth and for Bronx residents. And really just had a wonderful discussion. And I felt like it was an extremely productive time, and we're looking forward to sort of airing our results in a future,
a future edition of Bronx Talk, for example.
That's right.
Courtney, for you, this was an important one also because the stated focus was waterfronts. Talk to me, and we're going to get into a lot of the specifics. Why is waterfronts and park waterfronts such an important issue, not only, of course, for the city of New York, but for the Bronx in particular?
Well, there isn't enough access to the waterfront in the whole city, but especially in the Bronx. If you think about it, the New York City area is one of the most waterfront-rich areas in the whole world. Hong Kong is the only waterfront area or waterfront urbanized area that exceeds the number of waterfront miles that we have. Yet we never think of ourselves as a waterfront city, and we surely don't think of the Bronx as a waterfront borough, even though it is. And so one of the reasons is that we don't get to the water. We can't get to the water. We haven't used the waterfront or designed or developed it in the last 15 or 20 years to really provide for access for our communities.
And so here was an opportunity, at least, to continue that dialogue. Previous borough president had a number of stated plans for the waterfront. Some may have come true, some may have not. We could review that at some point. Let's go back to what we had talked about 2 weeks ago. And I thought it was one of the most interesting things that we had presented. We had pictures of Mill Pond Park and a look out at the waterfront. And we showed that even though it was supposed to have a nice look at the waterfront, there were those train tracks in front. Chauncey, you were very specific when we toured there. Is there ever a chance of getting some access at that point? We'll start at that point geographically in the Bronx, so that it can be improved, or is it kind of designed that way and there's not much you can do?
Well, there's two possibilities. I'll say something, maybe Courtney can jump in and say, but, one is the Yankee Stadium ferry access, as we saw in our photo collage from the last time, is that there's actually a crossing that already gives you a dock where you could actually walk out and get to the water. The obvious issue right now is that it's only open during Yankees games, and it's only open for ferry traffic.
So somebody could jump off the ferry and they can go to the game. Let me just jump in, and Courtney designed something for us. What could that be that could work other than just a ferry landing for people who come to see the ball game?
Well, one of the new initiatives we're working on are docks that are floatable, small docks that accommodate everything from small human-powered boats to large historic educational vessels and ferries, all in one platform. And these are a new design. It's called the Community Eco Dock that the Metropolitan Waterfront Alliance is working on with its partners. And the idea is that we can have a low-cost docking facility that many different kinds of boats can use. And unfortunately, the way we're designing a lot of our boat areas is that only a few types of boats, or ferries in particular, can use them.
So in this particular case, a ferry can pull up there. What you're saying is if they would take another look at it, you say floatable, so it would be like a pier of some kind?
No, it's a 20 by 40 dock. It's a square, and it has one side that accommodates human-powered boats, so it's low to the ground and low to the water level and graded. And then there's a low freeboard on the other side, so a variety of boats can hook up and use a gangplank to get to it.
Boy, this is natural questions. What would the cost of one of those be? Let's say if the city of New York said, you know what a great idea for that Yankee ferry landing.
Well, and the city is saying it's a good idea, which is very exciting. It's just a question of getting the funding and getting the energy built and the excitement.
What would it cost?
Well, the range, it
Millions?
depends. No, not at all. A range between 500 and 800,000. And the difference depends on the conditions, the site conditions, and then also the type of design that you'd have.
And then the second part of that question, aside from what is it cost, is what is the political initiative needed to do it? It sounds, the way you just described it to me, a layman here, sounds win-win-win. Why not? Why couldn't we do it?
Well,
one vote right here.
We're building the word. We're getting the momentum going for this. It takes funding, it takes political will, and it takes identifying the right places in the city for these to go. They don't fit everywhere. They don't fit where there are really low bridges and it's impossible for ships to go past. It's not safe in some areas because the currents are really strong, but there are plenty of areas all over the city.
That spot at south of 161st Street would be a spot?
I'm not going to say,
I
haven't analyzed the currents, but there are definite options. And the other thing about these docks is they're movable as well. So they are semi-permanent, but we could have them there temporarily.
Did you want to add something?
I'm actually curious whether it could accommodate the same number of ferries that the current dock would accommodate.
In other words, certainly you don't want to cut out the people who do use it for the current use for travel to the Yankee games, which is a very important use. We'd like to see that used more because it takes cars off the streets and off the Deegan and everything else.
Well, it doesn't replace the ferry dock. It would be used next to it, or there would have been, or the idea would be in the future, if you're designing a ferry facility like that, you put something on the side that allows for all different kinds of boats to come as well. And you already have the pedestrian access, so it's a great win-win situation.
There's one other issue. We're going to get off the waterfront for a second and get into something that we mentioned during that last show. And the borough president made it very clear, and to some rousing applause at his State of the Borough address, about using a garage at in the Yankee area that's being underutilized and making that a hotel. But you pointed out on our show that it's parkland. Is it possible to take that garage, which the borough president says is unused, and turn it into a hotel? Or would you be not happy because, you know what, this is parkland and we should have it returned to be a park?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different uses for parkland. I mean, if the hotel were to put back amenities into it, maybe if we were to get a recreation center for the community, because that whole stretch of the South Bronx, there's not a single exercise or recreation facility, indoor facility. So if you could get, a parks workout facility in there, or exercise facility, or some activities for the community in addition to the hotel,
it could be some field.
It could be a win-win in that sense. But You know, I mean, you always have to be considerate when you're converting parkland, you know, from one use to another. It is a parking garage right now, so it's completely not utilized.
Even though
by
that
the
is
community.
on parkland.
Yes.
So that will be something, as enthusiastic as the BP was about it, that'll be something that is going to have to be dealt with somewhere along the way when a decision is made, potentially.
Certainly.
You talked about recreation in the area. One other thing that I wanted to mention is about the idea of the tennis courts, and this was something that I got some feedback on. One viewer, and frankly, friend of mine, had said, you know what, you were being a little flippant, that there really are seasonal rates for community people that you didn't, give some credence to, because basically you and I looked at the price list and it said $45 an hour, $80 an hour. Is there use of the community of that tennis center?
There is. I'm unaware of how many community members are using the bubble. You saw the prices. I saw the prices. My wife's on the community board in Community Board 4. I'm very active in the community. This is the first time I've heard of a community pricing, that's outside of those posted rates.
In other words, so during the summer or any, and from your knowledge, there's nothing, no relationship with the New York Junior Tennis League or other groups that would certainly encourage low-cost participation.
Now, I've heard that the New York Junior Tennis League will be doing youth programming, early morning programming, and so that is supposed to be built into that. I don't think it's yet begun.
We didn't see any evidence of it.
No.
So it sounds like there could still be more discussion on this.
Yes,
All right.
I know there's plans for it.
All right, okay. Back to the waterfront we go. Let's talk about other areas in the Bronx that, you say, gee whiz, this is going well or not going well. Certainly in the whole southern part of the borough, there's waterfront there.
Yeah.
How are we doing as far as access?
Well, actually, I can tie it into the last point about one of the really exciting things about the Speak Up was that it was clear from the folks from Rocking the Boat and from the Harlem River Community Boathouse that there are plenty of free and really truly free family programs and children's programs on the water offered by these amazing organizations, and this is happening all over the city. Our website has a listing of many of these organizations, and believe it or not, it's probably cheaper to take a small boat out on the waterfront in New York City than it is to play tennis in some places.
That would not necessarily surprise me, given the price list that we saw.
But I think the thing I want to say about that, though, is that there's so much enthusiasm for the water that there are nonprofit organizations and volunteers who dedicate their time and their lives and resources from generous people to make this happen on the waterfront. And that's an exciting thing happening.
You'll be happy to know that we've put your website on the screen so people can see that it's there. We put the address, and now they're taking a look at the website. Go ahead.
Given the time, the Speak Up happening this weekend, I didn't have time to get you a great PowerPoint, but the current borough president, Ruben Diaz Jr., has continued on the former borough president's plan for really redeveloping the waterfront along the entire Harlem River. And at the Speak Up, Wilhelm Ronda, the director of the planning department, presented a wonderful development plan, for really developing greenway access, developing, bicycle greenways, and really developing different park areas up and down the Harlem River. So that's a big focus for the borough president, and it coincides with the community's desire to get on the water.
We're going to go to the telephone in just a moment, but that implies a very, very important aspect of this, and that is that if in fact the city is going to partner with communities in these efforts, it's one thing to have people at the Bronx standing there and saying, well, we're going to speak up, et cetera, et cetera. It's another thing to have the Parks Department of the City of New York say, good idea, let's fund the ferry landing or the dock that you talked about, let's fund the Greenway. What is that effort like, and was there a sense at the Speak Up that the City of New York was going to be involved in something like that?
Yes, absolutely.
That's the question, I assume.
Well, to take it back to Mill Pond Park, Velma Seegers was there, and she's with the Queensborough Commissioner, the Parks Commissioner for Queens, Dorothy Lewandowski, and they're trying to get a rowing program in that cove. So you can't pass the railroad tracks to get out onto the river, but there's a possibility of the Parks Department working with a community group to have rowing go on in a little cove. And anyway, that's just...
And we pointed that out, I think,
yeah,
during the
and
show.
she mentioned it actually on Saturday, which was great. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The Parks Department is focused like never before on the waterfront. There's a New York City Water Trails initiative that they're working on.
So maybe the time is best now because you're saying that there is out there some idea that this could be a direction to go.
And this is the city? Yes, and it's very true.
Okay.
And yes, and the comprehensive waterfront plan is another thing to talk about.
Let's go to the telephone then. Did you want to add something beforehand?
Very quickly, I was just going to say that the city and Parks Department have focused on a few parcels that they really would like to develop. One is Pier 5, where we were looking at the southern part of Mill Pond Park. The other is Depot Place, which is located right near the High Bridge. And then the Kingsbridge Fordham Landing section in the northern part of the Harlem River. So there's,
under the 207th Street Bridge in that area over there.
So there's several areas they're looking at developing, working with community to envision those areas.
All right, our buddy Mark from Pelham Parkway is with us. Hi, Mark. Always nice to have you.
Hey, Gary.
How are you?
Ladies and gentlemen. I have a comment and then I have a question.
Okay.
I mean, there is a reality going on right now that the city keeps claiming it has no money. They want to lay off 4,000 teachers. Right. And if you remember, when they did the last thing with the parks somehow just aren't going to be a priority. I'm wondering what happened they do with the money from the filtration plant that they were supposed to give to all the parks. And they still haven't fixed up all the parks near Yankee Stadium in the trade. They're about a year, 2 years behind. And now you're talking about amenities. In relationship to those tennis courts, the people from the community can use it on the off hours, which is like early in the morning or I think very late at night.
You know that for sure, and they can use that at no cost?
Yeah, I think they pay like I believe. Don't quote me on this. I believe it's like a very moderate cost, like $3 to $5.
Well, that's great. I'm thrilled to hear that. I wish, of course, they had more access, but that's good.
Yeah, but that's not right because during the day, the peak hours is when the people who can afford to pay the $50, $60, $80, that's when they can play or after work.
Okay, but Mark, that was a very important piece of information. I thank you for presenting it.
Well, I believe, don't quote me on it, that's what I heard. I heard they have access to it in
it's a talk show. You can say what you want.
You know, like when most people don't want to play tennis at 12 midnight is not when I'd want to play tennis in that area. So forget that. But I do have a question.
Sure.
So with all these budgets and problems that New York City's having, I doubt, and maybe I'm wrong, can you correct me, how do you see them actually implementing these waterfront deals?
Very good question.
Like that.
So, and I'll let them respond, and then I'll get, because I know something about the filtration money, but let's talk a little bit about...
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Let's talk a little bit about what he's saying. During these times, boy, with things going on in the city, it's a pretty hard sell. Hey, build me a dock, or, I got some Enviro dock that I want to put on the waterfront.
Yeah, it is. However... The economy changes, and we have to be prepared for the time when it's going to get better. And if we're prepared, we'll be able to move forward on lots of new, wonderful waterfront projects. The economy is really bad, but that can't stop us because these are projects that are important for our quality of life. They're important for communities. They're important for children. It's all about making New York City a great, wonderful place to live and good for people, and we can't stop that. Yeah.
I'll start off by saying, many people have a lot of gripes with Mayor Bloomberg, and I do also, but what is happening in the next few weeks is there's going to be the presentation of the, new waterfront plan for New York City, and so the coordinator of that plan was actually at Speak Up, talking about they've been doing community visioning over the past year, getting visioning perspectives from communities all across the city, on trying to improve the waterfront, and
for the time that Courtney's talking about that the city is a little more flush and able to, what an interesting word to use, and able to put some of these things in place.
Well, but also some of this is not going to cost money as much as making better decisions with the money that we do have. And like I mentioned on the show before, good waterfront design is essential, and what a huge waste if we're designing our waterfront parks in the way where we can actually access them the way we need to. And that's not going to cost as much. That's not going to cost more money as much as just take more time to get the right community feedback.
I wanted to respond to Mark's question because I do know something about the filtration money that was the $200 million. There has been a lot of talk about accounting for that money right now, and there's a lot of questions about where it has been spent. Many communities, I spoke to people in Community Board 9, for instance, at Pugsley Creek Park, and they told me directly, all of a sudden the monies we were promised have dried up, and there has been some talk at Regatta Park.
Yes.
In fact, I was at a filtration monitoring committee meeting, and there was talk at Regatta Park that all of a sudden the monies they were promised also had dried up. So they fixed up many parks, there are many lovely areas, but there still are a lot of questions, and one of them comes from that Harris Field boondoggle right near where we are, where they spent a lot more than they had said they were going to spend, and so as a result, the theory is that it's being pulled from other places. I think the bottom line for Mark and others who wonder what happened to that money, I think there needs to be a proper accounting, public accounting, and that has not been done yet. Go ahead.
There was a direct question to the Bronx Commissioner about this at the Speak Up event for the Regatta Park, and his response was that the money is being portioned out and that it's being done in different disbursements. So while the money for Regatta has run out at this point, the full funding is still there. We have yet to follow up. We had written a letter from the Harlem River Working Group requesting this information, and so we're still going to push on this because it is a concern.
For people who don't know where Regatta Park is, why don't you just articulate it?
Regatta, you're gonna.
It's just south of Fordham Road, right on the Harlem River. There.
Right,
That's like, I guess if you drive south in the Deegan, it's like over there.
Right. It's,
which brings up another thing that Courtney and I were talking about before the show. Roberto Clemente State Park is a state park. And so if there are issues with the waterfront now, there has to be some kind of agreement between the state and the city. Our state parks and our state park waterfronts run in a similar way that city park waterfronts are, or does this take you and your group into a whole other political realm and in a whole other series of considerations?
We hear from groups that it's completely different dealing with the state parks, and we also know that the state is facing a budget that's worse than the city's.
We're all facing budget problems,
and the
personally
staffing,
and publicly.
The staffing and the time that the state parks have on staff to work with the community is much less, I believe, than the Parks Department. Now, actually, Chauncey can probably talk more about Roberto Clemente and some of the issues with having more voting access
Pass it right along to your colleagues.
Sure.
Again, it's the Courtney and Chauncey show.
So there are two docks in Roberto Clemente State Park, but they're both fenced off. One of them is accessible to one single community group, the Harlem River Community Rowing Group, which is an excellent group that's teaching folks to use the professional rowing teams, the long 5-person rowing shells. And so you can do that low cost.
But that's only one group.
But one group can access them.
And there may be other groups that might want
Many groups would like to utilize them, but they need to go through a process to get approved. And at this point, even we asked the Harlem River Community Rowing Group to do an event with us at the state park, and we were told that we would be unable to be approved for the event, that they didn't want to allow waterfront access.
Courtney, how are we doing down into Hunts Point and that beautiful area down in Soundview where you can look out over the sound of all things?
Yeah.
Are we doing all right in those areas?
Well, we could do a lot better.
Could always do better.
We heard at the Speak Up about a boat launch that's really only adequate for power boats, and that therefore it eliminates the ability of groups like Rocking the Boat to run programming out of there.
Because they have canoes and rowboats.
Yeah,
and things
so
like
again, it's another issue of not designing for a wide range of boats, which is what we have in the harbor and that type of thing. So
what would it take to redesign that so that be a little more inclusive?
Well, it's about Again, it's about talking to the community. What are the groups that are going to use it? What are the types of boats you have? How long are the boats? If the boats come into the shore, how do people unload to get out of the boat? Does the boat go straight in? Does it have to go to the side?
We're getting short on time, but this goes back to what you said. It's not necessarily a matter of the dollar amount. It's a matter of the will and also kind of designing and just being a little smarter about how we design it.
Yeah.
Do you have the sense we're moving in the right direction? My sense is you believe that because of all these initiatives.
Well, I think so. Unfortunately, we have to work harder to get the word out, especially to the design community, but also to communities to tell them that, look, there's more than one way to do these parks. And so the more we hear from the communities and the more we tell, the more communities know that they have the right to be heard from. That's really great. Mm-hmm. So we have to keep getting that message out there.
And your website is there on the screen, and so that would be one way in, and people would say, I've got, and here's a way to interpret what you're hearing on the show. I've got a waterfront area right in my neighborhood. What's the status of that? We'd love to be able to, go out there on a beautiful spring day, and whether it be fishing or rowing or whatever it is, and then you contact a group like yours, and we can proceed.
Yeah.
Chauncey, you're going to, after 2 long shows, you're going to get the final word. Anything you want to say now about parks and everything else?
Well, I guess we have a lot of work to do just in engaging communities to get to the waterfront too, because communities have been obstructed from the waterfront for such a long time that when you're talking about developing parcels on the waterfront, sometimes the community's like, well, why would I go down there? And so I live in Highbridge, which is right along the waterfront, and a lot of folks in my neighborhood have never been down in the Harlem River and don't even know the name of the Harlem River. So,
well, it's the Harlem River, folks. But actually, that was one of the concerns that we raised during the slideshow, is that those ramps and pathways were not exactly accessible. Maybe, as Courtney said, a little better planning would do us all a little better.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Courtney Worrell, thank you. Chauncey
you.
Young, thank you. Folks, thank you. If you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at BronxTalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Archives of Bronx Talk are available at bronxnet.org. You click Bronx Talk on the right-hand navigation bar. Now, next Monday night, it's education, and the 2 education officers from the Office of the Borough President, they will be here. Then on the 14th of March, the new editor of the Daily News Bronx Bureau. So always something interesting on this program. We'll see you next Monday night, and every night, Monday night at 9 for Bronx Talk. As we have said, in our 17th year, one of the longest-running weekly talk shows in New York City. Special thanks to producer Jane Folloro, director Michael Arias, William, who's working so hard here in the studio, and the cast of thousands who are all around us here tonight. And to you, good night.
Mom, I'm not gonna go to college.
What are you saying? You've got to go to college.
Well, they offered me a job and...
Son, college is much more important.
No.
Yes.
No, Mom.
Yes.
Anyways, it's my decision.
Okay, well then decide what degree you're going to get, because you will go to college.
Their tomorrow depends on your words today. The Hispanic Scholarship Fund has the information you need to help your kids go to college.